All right, good morning, everyone. It is 10 o'clock and we will go ahead and get started. My name is Robin Donaldson and I am the Chief Operations Officer at Indiana Youth Service Association, the host for this particular session. And I'm going to take care of a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to our presenter today, Whitney Nixon. So we will be recording this session. We've had several folks try to enter, but our session is full. We cap at 25, so count yourself lucky. There's the benefit of getting on early, but we will be making the recorded session available after we're done. With that in mind, I ask that you would keep yourself muted unless you want to ask a question. And you can also ask questions through the chat feature. I will be monitoring the chat box to bring any questions to Whitney's attention. And if you would like a certificate of attendance for participating in this webinar, I will also type in my email address and you can email asking for a certificate. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Whitney. Whitney is also a member of IYSA. She is our Indiana Trafficking Victims Assistance Program Service Provider Support Director. And so, Whitney, if you have other things you want to add to your introduction, please feel free, but I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Robin. Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited that we have a full house. As Robin said, we're full this morning, but just know that in case you have a coworker or someone who wanted to attend and wasn't able to, we will be offering this same webinar again on Tuesday the 7th. On the 7th, whatever day of the week that is. All of my days of the week are starting to run together. Anybody else experiencing that? So we will be offering this same webinar again on the 7th in case folks want to attend. As Robin said, we do have the chat box available. So if you have a pressing question, if you're anything like me and you need to ask it the moment you think of it or you will forget it, please feel free to use the chat box, and then Robin will bring those to my attention if they're things that I can answer, and she'll answer them if they're things that she can answer. And then we'll also save some time at the end for questions. If folks want to chat, you can unmute yourselves and we can chat that way. But so today we are just going to spend a little bit of time talking about self-care. So you all have probably heard a lot about self-care over the last several days, weeks, and how important self-care is. But I think that we also need to keep in mind that we are youth workers, that we are caregivers in a professional capacity. And so the way that we do self-care and the way that we care for others looks a little bit different than those folks who are not caregivers, those folks who are not professionally caring for others. So hopefully, as we go through this presentation, there will be some information that is specific to the work that you are doing as caregivers, as well as some information that is helpful to you as an individual, as a person who is kind of struggling with all of the same things that everyone else is currently struggling with. So we're just going to talk a little bit about self-care and how you as a caregiver can care for yourself while you are also in the midst of trying to care for others. So we're going to start with self-care is essential. And, you know, we've all heard this, but it's essential. It's essential in the work that we do now, and it's essential in the work that we do always. And it's essential in the work that we are doing in the middle of this pandemic crisis. And so really just being mindful of self-care and how we can care for ourselves, because ultimately when it comes down to it, self-care is not selfish. Self-care is essential in being able to be the best that we can be to take care of other folks. So let's start with what is going on. And I think we've all probably asked this question a number of times in the past couple of weeks. What is going on? But I would like to kind of talk a little bit about what is going on more from a why are we experiencing some of the things that we are experiencing. So within our brains, we have this fun little part that lives way deep down in the center of our brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is part of our most primitive brain. It is part of the internal part of our brain that basically keeps us alive. And the function of the amygdala, for all intents and purposes, is that it is our alert system. It is the part of our brain that scans our environment for danger. Now, if you think back to, hundreds of thousands of years ago, our amygdala was really busy, right? Our amygdala was constantly scanning the environment for any kind of physical threats, anything that could potentially put us in danger, right? And this is really kind of where our fight or flight response comes from. In our world today, our amygdala is not having to scan our environment for wild animals nearly as much as it was many, many, many years ago. But what our amygdala does have to contend with now that it didn't have to contend with before is all of the information that comes in to us from all different places. So our amygdalas right now in our brains continue to scan our environments and ask, am I safe? Right? That is the entire job of the amygdala, to determine, are you safe? Well, in our world right now, we are getting inundated with information that we are not safe. We are getting inundated with information about contagion and pandemic and folks who are getting sick and folks who are dying. You can turn on the news, you can check the news on your phone, and we are getting kind of to the minute constant updates about people who are contracting the virus, people who are in the hospital, people who are losing their lives to this virus. And so what's happening is that all of that information paired with the information from our own friends and family who are saying, this is scary and I'm worried, paired with the information from the folks that we work with who are saying, I don't know if I'm going to be able to take care of myself. I don't know if I'm going to be able to take care of my kids. I don't know how we're going to get through this. All of that information tells our amygdala that it is not safe. It tells our amygdala that we are not safe. So that feeling that you're experiencing, that kind of that fear or that anxiety, and you may not experience it all the time. You may experience it all the time. You may experience it in waves. You may experience it in bits and pieces. But what is happening is your amygdala, that part of your brain that is primitive and whose function is to determine if you are safe and to keep you alive, is overwhelmed. It continues to hear that it's not safe. It continues to receive messages that it's not safe. And so it's responding in a way that it's not safe. And so we're going to talk a little bit about kind of how we can help our amygdalas to feel safer, but also remember that you have control of your amygdala. So when you start to feel yourself feeling unsafe, when you start to feel yourself, kind of having one of those anxious moments, remember that you are currently safe. If you are in an environment where you are safe, if you are quarantined at home with your loved ones and you have food, you are safe in that moment. And so you can tell your amygdala that you are safe in that moment to help, reduce some of that anxiety. Some other things that are internally kind of going on during this pandemic is that we have these emotions, we have these kind of primitive emotions, fight or flight, and feeling unsafe, but we don't know what to do with them. We don't know how to manage them. And so one of the ways that we do that is via behavior. And we as human beings like to have control. We like to have control over ourselves. We like to have control over our environment. And so one of the things that has been happening, and you all are very aware of this, I know, is that people have been buying things and hoarding them. There was, the great toilet paper scarcity of 2020 because people were buying just tons and tons of toilet paper. Nowhere in the information initially were we told that people who potentially contracted the virus needed toilet paper, and yet people were buying all this toilet paper. And part of the reason for that is because people felt unsafe, people felt uncomfortable, people felt fight or flight responses, and they didn't know what to do with that. And so what they did was they attempted to find a way to control their environment. And the way that they tried to control their environment was by purchasing things that they could then have, that they could then use as a way of feeling as if they were safe, right? So as opposed to internally talking to their amygdala and telling their amygdala that they were safe, what they did was they purchased lots and lots of toilet paper and then used that toilet paper as an external way of telling their amygdala that they were safe. So that kind of is another way that we sometimes try to maintain that sense of safety, is through our behavior. Also, it's important to note that there is some contagion factor in anxiety. For anyone who has been to the grocery store recently and you see that there is maybe just a couple of packages of toilet paper left, and you think, well, I don't really need toilet paper now, but everyone else has purchased toilet paper, and if I don't buy toilet paper, I may not be able to get toilet paper later, right? That's part of some of that kind of contagion of anxiety. If you see folks who are putting 6, 8, 10 packages of meat into their cart, or dozens of cans of soup, right? That part of your brain starts to go, well, maybe I need to do that too. Maybe they know something I don't know. Maybe this is how I can maintain my safety. And in a world where we don't really know what's going to happen next, people are experiencing that anxiety, and people are looking for ways to manage that anxiety through the controlling of their environment and through behavior. And so when we see other folks doing that, it kind of triggers that in us as well. And so just remember that, you have control over your amygdala. And so when you see other people doing things like purchasing lots of toilet paper or purchasing lots of meat or canned goods, you can remind your amygdala that you're safe, and that you are going to, that you're going to get what you need in order to be safe. The other thing that's important to note is that folks who work with youth, our amygdalas tend to kind of function in a higher state of alert anyway. We're used to responding to emergencies. We're used to kind of reacting to situations that maybe other folks are not used to reacting to, and wouldn't necessarily know what to do. And for us, we know what to do. And so for us, what that means is that we already are kind of a step above where most people are in terms of the heightened state of our amygdalas. And so when we find ourselves in that place of not feeling safe or having anxiety, that might mean that we are even kind of heightened past our normal level, which is quite a bit heightened, more heightened than most people. So again, just keeping in mind that these are the things that are going on internally inside our brains, inside our bodies, when we are feeling those feelings of anxiety or those feelings of discomfort, and knowing that you have control over that. So when you feel that sense of anxiety, or when you feel that sense of needing to have control over your environment, that's normal. And you can control that by identifying that you are safe and that you do have the things that you need, and just really being able to kind of identify how you're feeling and why you're feeling that. And then you can kind of take control of that anxiety and discomfort that you're feeling. So there's also this concept of compassion fatigue. And compassion fatigue is essentially when an individual is feeling kind of exhausted and no longer able to function as a result of prolonged exposure to stress. So many of you are probably familiar with the concept of burnout. And burnout is really just where we're feeling overwhelmed with work. We're feeling as if we don't have the support that we need to do our job. We're feeling that perhaps there's more to be done in a day than we have time to do. And burnout, while a very real concern in a professional capacity, is something that is pretty common. Compassion fatigue is made up of both burnout, which is pretty common, and then secondary trauma, which is not particularly common. Secondary trauma is going to be when an individual is experiencing trauma, not because that trauma is happening to them specifically, but because they are adjacent to that trauma. So for a lot of us, secondary trauma is when we are working with an individual who has experienced significant trauma, when we are doing the things that we do in a professional capacity to help an individual work through their trauma. And so as youth workers, as people who see trauma often, we are at risk for secondary trauma. So what happens during a pandemic is that there really is more secondary trauma out there. Instead of a few of your clients experiencing secondary trauma, it might be a lot more of your clients who are a few of your clients who are experiencing trauma. It might be a lot more of your clients who are experiencing trauma. Perhaps their trauma comes from a loved one being ill or a loved one passing away. Perhaps their trauma comes from not having the resources that they need to be able to live during the situation that we are currently in. But as youth workers, as caregivers, we are at risk for something like compassion fatigue, because that burnout that we have the potential of feeling pretty regularly, paired with that secondary trauma of trying to help individuals work through the trauma that they're experiencing, can potentially put us at risk for compassion fatigue. Now, I tell you this because I want you to be aware of the possibility. Unfortunately, we can't change the fact that folks are going through trauma. Unfortunately, we cannot change the fact that it is our role as youth workers to support and to help folks work through the trauma that they're experiencing. But what we can focus on instead is that concept of burnout, and feeling as if we have to do more than we have time to do, feeling as if we have to have more productivity. So if you are starting to feel from a professional capacity exhaustion and dysfunction, keep in mind that that does have the potential to be compassion fatigue, and that being aware of that and trying to address the burnout may actually be the most effective way of being able to address the feelings of compassion fatigue. So this is just a small graph that kind of explains what the difference between secondary traumatic stress and burnout is. So you can see, secondary traumatic stress is going to be either kind of one exposure, or it can be repeated exposure, depending upon what the traumatic event is. Other things that secondary traumatic stress usually impacts just the people who are involved in addressing that stress, whereas burnout can be seen often as an organizational issue. And so just really kind of looking at this and thinking about if you are experiencing compassion fatigue, how either from the secondary stress perspective or the burnout perspective, individuals can really look at shifting something to reduce exposure to the compassion fatigue. So we've all heard the concept of put your oxygen mask on first, right? That idea that when you're on a plane, if something happens, the oxygen mask will drop down, and the flight attendants always say, put your mask on first before you help others. And the reason for that is obviously because you have to take care of yourself or you can't take care of others. And so this is not an uncommon thought process. This is not a new thought process, but really thinking about it in terms of how we are caring for ourselves during this particularly stressful time. We have to care for ourselves before we can care for others. We cannot take care of other people in our lives, our friends, our family, the folks that we are working with, if we are not taking care of ourselves. And so I think sometimes, especially as youth workers, especially as folks who work with people who have a lot of trauma and a lot of stressors in their life, we sometimes think that taking care of ourselves is it's selfish. It's why I can't take time for myself. I need to use that time to help my clients. But really keep in mind that if you are not taking care of yourself, you will not be able to take care of your clients. You will not be able to take care of your family. You will not be able to kind of work at the level of your potential because you're not taking care of yourself. So remember, put your oxygen mask on first and then help others to put on theirs. So something that I think is important to note as we are sorting through some of these complicated feelings related to the pandemic, related to quarantine, related to a stay-at-home order, is that we are experiencing loss, that we are experiencing grief related to the things that we are related to the things that we are missing, related to the things that we don't have. So keeping in mind that usually when we talk about grief, we think about tangible things. We think about losing a loved one. We think about losing a pet. But when we are talking about kind of this global pandemic and how it's impacting our lives, we really are talking about grief. We're talking about loss. So many of you are probably familiar with the stages of grief. But I think that really when we are talking about what we are going through right now, if you have had a variety of emotions, if your emotions have changed from week to week or day to day, you might have been going through the stages of grief. So for most of us, the stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, despair, and acceptance. So probably initially, many of us, when we initially became aware of what was going on related to COVID-19, we said, it's not that big a deal. It's not that big a deal. It's fine. Many people said it's just a bad flu. Everything is okay. We'll get through this. More people, more people die from the flu than from this. It's not that big a deal. We shouldn't have to change anything. And that's denial, right? And there are still some folks in the country who are experiencing this denial, who are experiencing this idea that COVID-19 is no different than other flus that we have been exposed to, and that we don't need to change our lifestyles, that we don't need to change our behaviors to address it. And that's denial, right? That sense that it's not actually happening. Some folks have moved on into anger. It's not fair. I shouldn't have to do this. I have lost my connection to my friends, my family. For the youth that we work with, they might have lost their connection to structure and stability through school. They might have lost their social connection through their friends that they got to see at school or after school. As of yesterday, when the announcement was made that schools will not come back for face-to-face classes before the end of the school year, many of our youth experienced a pretty significant loss in that they had very meaningful activities that they will not be able to participate in. So things like prom and graduation, those are very real losses that folks are experiencing. And so there's some anger there. There's some frustration at having lost the things that are important to us. So if you find yourself experiencing anger, that's okay. That's normal. That's part of the grieving process. Bargaining, right? You might find yourself bargaining through, it's okay if I do this because I'm not doing this, right? It's okay if I run to this location, or it's okay if I go get takeout from this location because I'm mostly staying at home. And so we're all doing some of that as well, right? The restaurants are still open for takeout and delivery. And so we're saying, well, I'm not leaving the house, or I'm not going to eat at a restaurant, so this is okay. And so we're trying to find ways to kind of balance that new lifestyle of staying home and quarantining with parts of our old lifestyle, like getting takeout or delivery. And then despair and acceptance are the last two stages of grief. Despair, that feeling of, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to deal with this. I feel lost. I feel helpless. I feel hopeless. And then finally, acceptance, where this is where we are. And so just keeping in mind that you are probably experiencing some of these stages of grief. And if you're having a hard time putting your finger on exactly what it is you're feeling, or you're trying to figure out why your emotions seem to be shifting rapidly, it might be because you are going through the stages of grief, because we are grieving the loss of a lot of things in our lives, and that's okay. It's okay to recognize that there is a loss. It's okay to recognize that even though you haven't physically lost someone, you haven't physically lost your health, you haven't physically lost a loved one, that there is still a loss. You've lost some of your freedom. You've lost your control. You might have lost some structure. You've lost your connection to folks. And so it's okay to grieve the loss of those things in your life. So some ways to kind of address that grief is by practicing self-care. So we will talk about some things that you can do specifically for self-care here in just a few minutes. Acknowledge your losses. Acknowledge that you have lost the ability to go out and spend time with your friends or family. Acknowledge that you have lost your sense of routine in getting up and going to work every morning. It's okay to acknowledge those losses. They may not seem tremendous or impactful in the face of what is going on in the world, but they are tremendous and impactful to you and your emotional state. So go ahead and acknowledge that you have lost things. Allow yourself to express emotions. It's okay to be sad or angry or frustrated that you have lost these things. Feel feel as if you can feel those emotions. I think sometimes we feel like we can't feel those emotions because we have to be strong for the people around us, but we can feel those emotions, and we need to feel those emotions. Remember that you are not alone in this. We as a country, we as a world are going through this together. And so reach out to those people and share your experiences, share similar experiences, share frustration, share your losses. That's a really good way of being able to recognize that this is not something that you're going through by yourself. And then the last one I think is hugely important, and that is be open to joy. Often in the face of tremendous loss or hardship, we feel like it is inappropriate to be happy. We feel like it is inappropriate to share things that are going well. But in terms of our emotional well-being and acknowledging that we are grieving, look for opportunities to identify joy. Be open to that joy. Don't feel guilty that you are experiencing that joy. I think that those are really important things to be able to do while we're all grieving and going through this process together.
Whitney, there's a question. Sheila asked,
Okay.
would it be safe to say that we don't always recognize compassion fatigue, or that we're experiencing secondary trauma or grief? We tend to wave our feelings off, both mentally and physically, and busy ourselves. So how can we force ourselves to stop and realize that this is something that we need to address?
That's an excellent question. I think that absolutely, we don't always know that we're experiencing it. Sometimes we experience it as exhaustion. Sometimes we experience it as feeling overwhelmed or mentally drained. And I think that really part of what we're talking about today is that we do have to force ourselves to be a little bit more aware of the fact that we can experience this, we are experiencing this, and that when you start to feel that, when you start to feel emotionally overwhelmed, when you start to feel physically drained, stopping and saying, am I feeling this way because of secondary trauma? Am I feeling this way because I am carrying the burden for another person? And if so, what can I do for myself to address that? Because I think that, again, so often as caregivers, we just kind of think that's part of it. We think that emotional exhaustion and feelings of being overwhelmed are just part of the job that we do. But remembering that in any other time, we have we have the strength and the ability and the self-care to kind of take that on. But right now, when we are struggling with personal grief and professional grief and handling the secondary trauma of other folks, and perhaps even handling our own trauma, it can become overwhelming. It can become too much. And so being aware of when that is occurring so that you can address it in that moment. So some things that, right, I've now told you all of the things that are happening. So what are some things that you can do? Well, one of the things that you can do is get in a routine. And you've probably heard a lot of folks say this, but to be in a routine, you know, you've all probably seen the schedules for kids and the we're going to do this and we're going to do this. But remember that for us as well, especially now working exclusively from home, we have to be able to separate. So getting in a routine, getting up at the same time every morning and having that routine, whether it is you get up, you get dressed, you grab a cup of coffee, and then you sit down at the computer. But having that routine so that your brain kind of gets into that routine. It's a new routine, so it might take a little while for your brain to feel comfortable with it, but just having a routine will help to reduce some of that discomfort that is happening. Also, make sure that you are incorporating some quality time. Just because you are working from home doesn't mean that you need to work all the time. So set aside some time for relaxation, set aside some time for fun, have some quality time, right? Have some time with where you video chat with your friends, or where you catch up with your kids or your significant other, but really making a very conscious effort to have that time. Wake up and go to bed at the same time. I know that sounds very easy, but it's pretty easy now to sleep in. It's pretty easy now to stay up much later. But again, that idea of getting into a regular routine is going to make things, I think, much easier for you as you are trying to kind of reduce some of the anxiety. Our brains like structure, our brains like routine, and being able to create some structure and routine while we are in the midst of some of the unknown actually will help reduce some of the anxiety. Eat regularly, obviously, right? Try to get meals in regularly, and then plan your meals in advance if at all possible. Those of you who are responsible for cooking meals or preparing meals or organizing meals, you know that if you wait until the last minute, it's actually added stress. So the more that you can plan in advance, the better. Also, that helps with shopping and not feeling stressed out because you don't have the things that you need. So again, the more of a routine that you can get in, the better your brain is going to feel, because that's one less unknown that your brain has to deal with. Stay active. Again, this is one that you probably heard a lot, but we want those endorphins. We want our brains to continue to produce those things that make us happy. Also, your body feels better. I think it's really easy to sit in one place all day. Give yourself breaks, right? Set timers. Make sure that you get up and you move, even if it's just to go outside, even if it's just to go for a short walk at lunch or after work. But give yourself opportunities to move, because we need that. There are a ton of virtual workouts that you can access now. I know a lot of folks are putting workouts on the internet virtually. And if you are the kind of person who doesn't want to work out by yourself, get some people to do it with you, kids, spouses, significant others. Again, it's always easier to do stuff when we have other people doing it with us. Inspire yourself. I really like this one because I think that we don't always take time to do these things for ourselves. Sure, we eat regularly and we drink water and we go for a walk, but do we inspire ourselves? Make sure that what you are putting in your brain is something that is inspiring and actually helps you to cope with what's going on, as opposed to causing you more stress. So instead of spending time on the internet, maybe pick up a book. Maybe that book that you've been meaning to read for a while that you just haven't had a chance. Watch an online concert. I know that there are tons and tons of concerts that are now being streamed online. I got an email yesterday that Andrew Lloyd Webber is putting all of his Broadway shows online to be accessed. So take advantage of those things. Maybe you have something that you love to do that you don't get a chance to do very often. Maybe you paint or you crochet. Take some time to do that. Take some time to rediscover why you enjoy doing that activity. And then maybe pick up something new, something that you've always wanted to try, something that sounds really cool. This is a really great opportunity to try something new that maybe you haven't had a chance to try before. But again, remembering that we want to do things that uplift us. We want to do things that make us feel positive. This is another important one. Scroll intentionally. So right now there is so much information out there about what is happening in the world, and some of it is accurate and some of it is not accurate, but it's all overwhelming. So be very intentional about your exposure to that information. I know for a lot of us, right, we when we have a free few moments, we hop online and see what's happening. We check Facebook or Twitter to see what is going on in the world, and usually that would be fine. Usually that would be fun, but right now we have to really be very mindful about what that looks like for us, because for most of us, we are probably overexposed to media. We are probably overexposed to things that are causing us stress and anxiety, and we probably don't even know it. We probably are not aware of the fact that as we are checking our phones and turning on the television or checking the news on our computers, that we are kind of being inundated with anxiety producing information. So a few things. I'm not saying that you should completely distance yourself from any kind of digital media, but what I am saying is that we really need to be very intentional about it. So make sure that the articles that you're reading are vetted. Anybody can put anything on the internet and say that it is valid information. Make sure that what you're reading is from a vetted source. Make sure that it is accurate information that's coming from a source that is providing accurate information. Try not to share information if it's not from a reputable source. We read these kind of inflammatory articles, or we see these kind of inflammatory things, and we say, oh my gosh, I want to share this with folks. But by doing that, we're actually perpetuating that cycle of anxiety and stress for others. Focus on content that provides information and not fear. So again, look for those articles that are providing information related to things that you can do. Articles that provide information related to ways to improve or ways to address, as opposed to those articles that focus exclusively on what is wrong and fear without providing any kind of tangible ways of addressing it. And then also limit exposure of children and vulnerable people. Those folks who are really going to struggle with this information, maybe not understand it, maybe it's actually going to make their anxiety and stress much worse. Limit their exposure to that so that they're not having to experience all of that anxiety and stress that comes along with digital media. Give yourself grace. What that means is that we are living in unprecedented times right now. There is no formula for this because we've never done this before. And so if you feel like you are not doing very well, maybe you feel like you haven't gotten into a routine, maybe you feel like you're not being as productive as you want to be, give yourself some grace. You are grieving, and it's okay that maybe you need a little more downtime. Maybe it's okay if you find yourself tired and you need to go to bed early, or you need to take a nap. Those are all ways of being able to take care of yourself. Flip the script. So if you find yourself feeling like you're not adequate, or you're not doing well, or why can't I just seem to get this right? Focus instead on what you are doing well. Focus on the fact that you have found a way to work from home, that you have found a way to reach out to your clients while dealing with your own stress and trauma. Don't focus on faults or inadequacies, and remember that it's okay that things are not normal. In fact, it's really good to acknowledge that things are not normal. Allow for mistakes and kind of develop a plan to recover from them. So maybe that means that things are taking you longer to get done because your routine is thrown off. So what does that plan look like for how to get through that? And then remember that we're all in this together. So reach out to your coworkers, reach out to your supervisors, let them know that you're struggling. That is not a sign of weakness. That is a way of letting folks know that you're having a hard time and being able to collaboratively work through how to make things better. So when we talk about self-care, there are a few different kind of areas that we look at. So the first is going to be physical self-care. So this is really going to be where you focus on sleeping and getting enough sleep. That's a huge one. And making sure that that sleep is good. Just because you're in bed doesn't mean you're necessarily sleeping. So make sure that you're getting enough sleep and that you're getting good sleep. Make sure you're exercising and you're getting water, and that you're getting healthy food, and try to limit the caffeine, alcohol, and sugar. I know right now that is kind of a difficult thing to do, you know, where we have access to these things and they make us feel better, they make us feel reassured. And so those kind of tend to be the things that we go to, but remember, in the end, those are things that are actually going to make us feel worse. So try to focus on things that are healthy, and then get rest. This is not sleep, but this is rest. So make sure you put your computer down, put your phone away, take some time to just sit on the couch and relax. Maybe it means, you know, going outside and sitting in the sun and relaxing, but take some time to rest, because physically your brain and your body need that. Emotional self-care. So being able to, I see you, Cheryl. I totally support the keeping of chocolate. I'm not getting rid of my chocolate either. Emotional self-care is going to be really focusing on acknowledging and addressing our emotions. So I think we all kind of are experiencing a lot of emotions right now, and being able to kind of identify what those are and how to manage those. So stress management, right? You all know what stress feels like, right? You know what stress prior to this situation felt like. So if you start to feel those feelings of stress, identify that as stress and take steps to reduce your stress, whether that means you take a break, whether that means you do some stretches or some deep breathing or some relaxation techniques. But when you identify that stress, remember that it doesn't have to be the stress that you're used to having, the stress that comes from the usual places, but that it is still stress and that you do still need to manage it. Emotional regulation and also emotional expression. So being able to regulate your emotions, not letting the fear and the panic kind of run away with you, but also being able to express those emotions. If you need to cry because you're feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling scared, then cry. That emotional release is really important to our emotional health. If you need to, you know, scream, if you need to stomp your feet, if you need to do things to get that frustration and anger out, do that, because by not expressing it, it's actually going to cause you a lot more problems. And then the last three: forgiveness, compassion, and kindness. Remember that other people are also struggling. Remember that, you know, while we want to put pictures up and, make fun of that person who purchased 2,700 rolls of toilet paper, that person is also struggling. That person is looking for ways to control their environment. So just keeping that in mind as well, that we are all going through similar things, and while it may not look the same in all of us, we're still going through the same thing. So be as compassionate and kind to people around you as you can. Social self-care, boundaries, right? Boundaries, physical boundaries and mental boundaries. Just because you're working from home, just because you're always available, doesn't mean you have to always be available. So we've heard a ton about physical boundaries and 6 feet and social distancing, but we haven't talked much about mental boundaries. If you typically during the work day have work hours from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And you only take emergency calls after 5 p.m., then that should be that should be your routine, that should be your setup. Just remember that you need to mentally take care of yourself. You need to put up those mental boundaries. And however you choose to do that is on you, and you have to find out what works for you. But just keep in mind that just because we're all home, just because we're all always available, doesn't mean we always have to be available. Maybe that means not answering emails after 5 p.m. unless it's an emergency. Maybe that means maybe that means when you wake up in the morning, you give yourself 30 minutes to drink your coffee and stretch and enjoy being awake, and then you start work. But really thinking about what are those mental boundaries and how can you put those in place to keep yourself safe. Social supports. Stay in touch with your friends and your family, even if it's just through video chat or through email or phone calls. But we are missing that social support that we're used to having. We don't have our coworkers, we don't have our friends and family. So find ways to have those social connections. Positive social media, we've talked about communication. Making sure that you're communicating with folks, that you're not isolating, that you are not feeling like what you're going through is unique. And ask for help if you need it. Ask for help from your friends, your family, your coworkers, your supervisors. Not feeling like you have to do this by yourself. And there are a lot of folks out there who have found some really great ways of doing this. So utilizing their experience to help yourself. And then spiritual self-care. So taking some time to be alone. People don't always realize how important it is to be alone, but being able to separate yourself. And I know for those of you who are trying to work at home, and your significant other or spouse is trying to work from home, and you've got kids who are trying to be schooled from home, finding some time to be alone can be really challenging. But even if it's just 15 minutes where you get to be by yourself with your thoughts, and take some time to really identify what's going on with you, can be really, really impactful. Mindfulness, so being aware of what's going on with you physically, mentally, emotionally, kind of staying connected to what is going on in the world, what is going on in your world right now. I think especially in times of extreme stress, we have the tendency to do the what ifs. What if this goes on for longer? What if this happens? What if more people get sick? And I think that really causes some struggles with us internally. So do your best to stay grounded in what is happening right now. Spend some time outside and try to have some space just for you. And again, for those of you who are living in a house with a significant other or a spouse and kids, and you just keep thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to have alone time? How am I going to have my own space? That's an important thing. So perhaps your sacred space is part of your alone time. So maybe that sacred space is yours just for 15 minutes at from 12 to 12:15. So just time to relax and really connect with yourself and caring for yourself while you're also caring for other people. So just a few kind of ways that we can help others, because even though we are in the midst of a pandemic and we're talking about how we can take care of ourselves, we are still caregivers and we are still youth workers and we still are responsible for helping others. So how do we talk to kids about what is going on right now? One of the most important things is to help them, to give them information in a developmentally appropriate way. So not sugarcoating things, giving them facts, but also making sure that we aren't talking to our 5-year-olds the same way that we're talking to our 15-year-olds in terms of information. Make sure that they understand what is going on in the country, in the world, in a way that is developmentally appropriate for them. Talk about what you can do. Again, remember, our brains want to have that control. So when you're talking about, when you're talking to children, tell them, here is what you can do, and here is your task. So maybe it's things like, make sure you wash your hands, right? Washing your hands, something you can do is to wash your hands regularly. And then maybe give them that task, right? Once an hour, you go wash your hands. Maybe you can talk to them about social distancing. And if you have to go out in public, they shouldn't get close to people. They shouldn't touch people. They shouldn't touch the racks at the grocery store. And then give them that task. Remember, we're getting ready to go into the grocery store, so don't get too close to people and don't touch the racks. Again, making it very concrete so they know what they can do to make things, to make their own environment better, and then they have a task that they can really hold on to and feel like they have some control over. Do regular check-ins. So this is especially important for those of us who are working with youth, but check in regularly. How are you doing? Do you have any questions? Is there anything that you've heard that you don't understand? Is there anything that you want to talk more about? But just making sure that they feel informed, because you know how much better you feel when you have information. Kids are the same way. They're going to feel less anxiety and more control if they know what's going on. And then have answers to their questions. If you don't have an answer to their question, it's okay to say, I don't know. But just making sure that we are addressing their concerns in the same way that we would want our concerns addressed. And you can see at the bottom of this slide, it's pretty small, but there is a link to the CDC. The CDC has some really, really great information, and they're keeping it up to date. They're addressing it actually really, really regularly. So if you need information about what to tell children or what to tell the folks that you're working with, the CDC is a really wonderful place to get that information and know that it is accurate and up to date. So when working with kids, sometimes it's important to help them to understand what they can control and what they can't control. So I really like this little chart here because it looks at things I can't control, so I'm going to let go of them, and things I can control, so I will focus on them. And it allows children to really kind of see what they can do versus what they can't do, and so it allows them a focal point for you know, their actions and their attention. So really being able to see that, like, I can't control if other people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. I can't control how long this will last. But what I can control is that I can, you know, I can have a positive attitude and I can find fun things to do at home. But I just really like this because it's a very kind of concrete way of helping kids to understand that there are some things that we can control and there are some things that we can't control. And focusing on the things that we can't control is going to create a lot more stress for us. And so I see that some of you are liking this chart. If you email me, I'll be happy to show you where I got it from. So how can we help others? We can be a role model, right? So however we portray ourselves is how others are going to see us. And so if we portray calmness, if we portray strength, if we portray that we will get through this together, then kids will see this. Kids will kind of take their cues from us. And perhaps as youth workers, we are the people in their lives who have to be calm and have to be strong because their parents are not, or their parents are unable to. And so really keeping in mind how we are portraying ourselves and our feelings related to this situation can be so impactful for them. And many of these are things that we've already talked about, but staying in social distancing and staying in place. So instead of saying like, well, it's okay if we go do this, helping youth to see why if this is important. What does social distancing do for us? What does this stay in place order do for us? And helping them to understand that maybe it's not about us specifically, right? Maybe it's not going to impact me specifically, but that it's for the greater good, right? It's about flattening the curve and making sure that fewer people are exposed to the virus. Keeping a routine and making plans for kids, again, so while making plans and having a routine, keeping a routine is really important for us, but also, a routine for kids. So what time do they get up? What time do they have breakfast? What time do they homeschool? And are they doing the same activities? And with your work with them, maybe you check in with them at the same time on certain days. Maybe the work that you're doing can be a little bit more structured, but really thinking about how do we keep a routine. And then making plans. So I think this is really important. We look forward to things, right? We look forward to activities, we look forward to interactions. And while we're all staying at home, sometimes we lose that ability to make plans and have those interactions. So making plans, whether it's just reminding them, hey, I'm gonna call and check in with you tomorrow, or hey, we're gonna do a fun activity on Friday, but giving them something to look forward to, because I think that when folks are at home and the routine can become a little challenging, having something to look forward to, especially for kids, can be really exciting and help to motivate them to continue going. Ensure their basic needs are met. So again, as youth workers, right, we have to make sure that they have access to food and they have access to the things that they need, basic necessities. So making sure that those are met, and then offering as much support and affection as we possibly can. Really just supporting the youth that we're working with, reminding them that we're going to be okay. So I found this really cool way of helping youth, really a very easy way of helping youth with mindfulness. And so it's the acronym RAIN. So R is recognize. So helping the youth that we're working with to be able to really identify what are they feeling. Do they feel out of control? Do they feel angry? Do they feel lost? Do they feel sad? But being able to really put kind of their finger on that feeling, that emotion, that whatever they're feeling inside. And as adults that, especially during this time period right now, it might be hard to figure out what that is exactly. So helping them to recognize what they are feeling, and being able to identify it and maybe even say it out loud. I'm feeling angry. And then the A is for allowed. So create space for that feeling. Let them be felt. Why are you angry? Right? Tell me why you're feeling angry, and then validate those feelings. Yep, it's okay to feel angry, right? You've lost a lot, or it's okay to feel angry because you're not getting to spend time with your friend, or you lost your activities at school. But really allowing for that space to feel those emotions and not shutting them down or making them feel as if they aren't important. And then investigate. So this is what you're feeling. What do you need? Do you need to vent? Do you need to, scream? Do you need to cry? What do you need to address this particular emotion? And then the N is nurture, support. So sometimes that's us supporting. Sometimes that's us as caregivers saying, it's okay, I'm here, I'm not leaving. And then sometimes that is encouraging the youth that we're working with to be able to support themselves. So giving them some coping skills, reviewing their coping skills, practicing their coping skills. But I really like this particular model because I think it's easy to remember, it's easy to follow, and it helps the youth that we're working with to really be able to pinpoint and address those kind of complicated feelings that they might be feeling right now. So for you all who are now grieving and struggling, but also having to kind of switch between your own work life, where you are addressing other people's grief and struggling, and the kind of personal feelings that you have going on, you have to figure out a way to be able to switch between work on mode and work off mode. So these are just a few suggestions for how to do that. The first is making it a conscious process. So instead of just kind of sliding into your workday, actually make it a process. So tell yourself out loud, this is what I'm doing, right? I'm starting work now. What that does, believe it or not, when your brain hears things, it actually kind of triggers your brain to go into work mode. So by saying I'm starting work now, or I'm stopping work now, it kind of delivers a stronger message to your brain that you are switching between work on and work off. Use images to help you kind of distinguish between the different modes. So whether if you're working from home with children, maybe putting a sign on your workspace that says, you know, work on, or having some kind of image, pictures, cards, things that you put out in your space that indicate that you are in work on mode. But again, just that kind of physical reminder that you are in work on mode or work off mode. Develop rituals that help you switch when you start and stop work. So maybe that is something as simple as making a cup of coffee and then sitting down at your workspace. Maybe it's something as simple as saying, okay, I'm done working for the day, and turning off your computer. But having those rituals to help you switch between starting and stopping really allows for a more kind of formal process, because we are no longer arriving at the office or leaving the office. So we have to create ways of having that separation between work on and work off. Don't compromise one mode for the other. Don't compromise a work on mode or a work off mode. So if you are in a work on mode, and your, you know, and your kids need something, do your best to try to address that in a work off mode. But also if you are in a work off mode, don't go sit down at your computer because you just thought of something you needed to do. Make yourself a note and then address it later when you are in work on mode. And then prioritize your tasks during each mode. As youth workers, it's really easy for us to get in a place where we're like, and I need to do this, and I need to do this, and I need to do this. But remember that in order to prevent burnout, there are only so many things that we can accomplish in a day, and that this work is still going to be there tomorrow. So prioritize. What do you need to get done today? And then do as much of that as you can. But when you reach that place where you are in work off mode, turn off your computer, say, I am in work off mode, I'm done working for the day, and then move into work off mode. But again, as many of those kind of concrete ways that we can use to switch from work on to work off will help us to stay focused, it will help us to stay in a routine, and it will help us from getting burned out while we are working from home. So here are just some additional resources that could be really beneficial if you are trying to figure out how to talk to folks or how to share information. So SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, has a nice article about how to cope with stress. The CDC has information about kind of up-to-date information about the coronavirus data, some of those kinds of things. The CDC has information just kind of about how to do some of those basic safety things like hand washing. If we need to share that with youth, we need to talk to kids about how to properly hand wash for one of their tasks. And then the National Association of School Psychologists has a COVID-19 resource center that also is really, has some really great ways of talking to kids and resources for youth. So with that, I think that is all of the information. Oh, I see Victoria. Yes, I can send the resources via email. Yeah, I can do that. Here is my, oh no, I've lost it. Oh, all right, well, it's not there. Here is my contact information. Victoria, if you send me an email, if anybody else wants this, and send me an email, and I can email the resources to you. Also, this presentation will be on the IYSA website, correct, Robin?
How to unmute myself. It will be on, so Indiana Youth Service Association has a YouTube training channel. And if you go to YouTube and you type in Indiana Youth Service Association, you do have to type it all. If you type in IYSA, you get the Soccer Association. So, but it will, so this recorded webinar will actually be there with all of these resources, yes. And I think I might have mentioned if anyone was on the suicide prevention, and I'll just say it here again, IYSA is working on a resource guide. And so we can make sure that these resources are also in that resource guide, which will be available on the IYSA website.
Thanks, Robin. So does anybody have questions? If anybody wants to, if you want to unmute yourself and talk, you're more than welcome to, or if you want to type things in the chat box. So if anybody has questions, or if anybody has any really great ways that they have found in addressing stress and addressing self-care, if anybody wants to share their insight into that, that would also be wonderful. So I can see some of the stuff going on in the chat box. It looks like the presentation will be uploaded to the YouTube channel likely later today. So hopefully that will be available for all of you. If you want to go back and check it out, I know there was some stuff in there that folks might want to use down the road.
I'll say, I was going to type this in and I just say it. The link to the recorded webinar also will be in that resource guide that can be found on the IYSA website, either if not today, then early next week. All right, well, yeah, it looks like maybe, Whitney, there are no more questions. Thank you. This was absolutely fabulous information. And we will be, so Whitney mentioned this, but I'll say it again, we will be doing this webinar again next Tuesday on the 7th, same time, 10 o'clock to 11:30. So if you had coworkers who were not able to get on because of the participation cap, please refer them to the Tuesday webinar. And thank you so much. I hope you all take care of yourself and use this information, put it to good use, and enjoy the weekend. Thanks, Whitney, so much.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.